And warm greetings and salutations to you all. I apologize for my, we'll call it conspicuous absence over the last couple of days. Getting into a somewhat, I guess we'll call it a personal situation. One of my cats, Isis, the really long, lanky black cat that I called Cat Snake, has recently been diagnosed with an absolutely terrible virus or disease called feline infectious peritonitis, or FIP for short. Some of you might have heard of it. It's an absolutely devastating disease for a cat to get. They get it from a feline coronavirus. Most cats get it. A small fraction, I believe a fraction of like 1% of the cats that contract it have it mutate in their system and it becomes FIP. And FIP is a 100% fatal disease. Currently, there are no FDA-approved drugs for FIP, although there was a study from UC Davis done either last year or the year before where they used a drug that was very similar to remdesivir, one of the treatment options for COVID-19, that is not FDA-approved. You can't get it in America. You have to get it from other countries, get it shipped in. So there have been a lot of logistical nightmares trying to get that stuff in. She's on treatment. The treatment itself has like a 95% success rate. 80% of the cats just require one round of treatments, which runs about 12 weeks. The other 20% relapse, and of that 20%, a very small fraction don't recover after a second round of treatments. So I'm not saying this for your pity. I don't want any pity points or anything like that from you guys. All I want really is just an understanding of why my absence was, well, absent. So with that said, with that sob story out of the way, let's go ahead and get back to some economics. Marker. And I got one. Yay! I got a few there. Okay. Yeah, we're in good shape. Okay, so we are going to talk about the role of income in the models. So from last time, if you recall, made a little graph where we had current consumption on the horizontal axis and we've got future consumption on the vertical axis. We learned about the agent's lifetime budget constraint. Put it here. It's supposed to be a straight line, straight enough for me. Not perfect, but oh well. And we talked about how there were a continuum of indifference curves. So we can call this, I don't know, U naught. All right, in this point of tangency, where the budget constraint touches the indifference curve at only one point, is the point that is defined or described by the Euler equation. So here, we'll call it like CT star. And CT plus 1 star. All right, so at this point, this is the optimal, I guess, set of points of consumption, right? This is an optimal sequence of consumption over time. All right, so we can call CT and CT plus 1 star an optimal policy sequence for consumption. But the interesting thing, though, is we've got two periods. We've got period 1, period 2. We've got income in period 1, period 2. We have consumption in period 1 and period 2. Right? Because these two periods are interrelated, right? There's a dynamic element. There is something that is tying period 1 to period 2. Right? What you save today, you can consume tomorrow plus a little bit more. And we discussed the role that the interest rate plays in that. And so the expected rate of return, sort of balanced out by your individual personal time preferences, will tell us when we want to consume, how much we want to consume today, how much we want to consume tomorrow. So what we can gather from that is something kind of cool. I'll use a different, I'll use the pink. What I'll say is that income does not have to equal consumption in each period. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are going like, Jesus Christ, dude. We're like a month into the class and we haven't even started monetary yet. Well, actually what I put here is where a lot of the monetary starts to come in. Because monetary policy and fiscal policy are so tightly interrelated with each other that if I teach you guys some of this stuff, and I teach you especially this point right here, you'll see that when the government enters some of these dynamic general equilibrium models, the government's budget constraint doesn't necessarily have to be satisfied each period. Taxes don't have to equal spending every period. However, taxes over, say, the projected lifetime of the government have to equal spending over the projected lifetime. So you can tax a little bit less today, spend a little bit more today, tax a little bit more tomorrow, spend a little bit less tomorrow. Right? So the government's budget constraint is technically always satisfied, just like this budget constraint, the individual consumer's budget constraint, is always satisfied, even though income isn't going to be equal to consumption in each period. For example, we could have income like this. Right, so YT plus 1 doesn't have to equal CT plus 1. YT doesn't have to equal CT. Just take a second to think about what is going on here. Think about whether the agent is initially borrowing or if the agent is initially saving. And by initially, I mean in period 1. I'll give you like 10 or 15 seconds to think about that. Okay, time's up. maybe a little bit more than 15 seconds, but I wanted to make sure I had all my notes nice, clean, and organized. So here, what's happening is agent is borrowing in period 1. How can we tell? Because CT star is greater than YT. In English, this means current consumption is greater than current income. And then, in the second period, they got to pay it back. Which means future consumption will be less than future income. Right? This is like if you take out a credit card, right? Cat gets ridiculously sick with FIP, for example, and the treatments, well, really the treatments vary based on how heavy the cat is, and one of the symptoms of the cat is losing a lot of weight. So you start out paying, let's say, $35 a day for 84 days to give this cat the injections that she needs in order to be able to recover. Well, maybe you can't afford that. Maybe that's kind of tough. Maybe you gotta, I don't know, put it on credit cards. So, in this case, if your cat's got FIP and you want to save the cat's life, and you will, I will be saving Isis's life. Don't worry about her. Well, worry, don't worry, that's entirely up to you. It's not me. It's not on me to tell you what to do. It's not on me to tell you how to feel about that stuff. But rest assured, she will be okay. She will make a recovery. She's already doing better, which is fantastic. So I have to consume more today than what I'm earning in order to be able to pay for these treatments, to pay for these injections. But that comes at a cost. That cost is I can't consume as much tomorrow as what I'm making tomorrow because I've got to pay back what I borrowed today. Now, there's also another situation that we could look at, that we could consider. And that other situation is the reverse of this. Let's say Isis is taken care of. Isis is fine. She makes a full recovery. We're a little bit further ahead in the future now. But I pay back everything from Isis's shots. Only now I know, or I have to be wary of the fact that because I have 3 other cats, I have 4 cats total, right? It's amazing I haven't gotten toxoplasmosis yet. Maybe I have. I can't even say that word right. That's what makes you like a crazy cat person. It's amazing I haven't gotten that yet if I haven't. But because I know that because Isis has had it, all of the other 3 cats have been exposed to the feline coronavirus. That doesn't mean they're all going to get it. Doesn't mean necessarily any of them are going to get it. Could mean all of them get it. Could mean none of them get it. But I have to be prepared for that. I have to be ready in the event that one of these other animals will contract FIP. And I got to go through the whole 12-week process again. So, what am I going to do in that case? Well, in the event that I need to prepare for something bad, that let's assume in this case this is a totally deterministic model. So this is assuming one of the cats, at least one cat, will get ridiculously sick sometime over the next 2 periods, whatever these periods are going to be. Now, I need to plan ahead for that, right? This is where I'm going to save. So what happens is, I am now here. In this situation, I am no longer initially borrowing. I am initially saving. I'm saving in period 1. How do we know I'm saving in period 1 aside from the fact that I just said I'm saving in period 1? Well, I'm saving in period 1 because current income is greater than current consumption. Right, so by the Euler equation, right, by this Euler equation, what's happening is, if you remember this beta, which is equal to 1 over 1 plus rho, if I just replace that, rewrite part of this Euler equation, make a mess while I do it, drive myself insane. Right, what's going on here, I guess I don't need this anymore. What's going on is the fact that I'm initially saving. So when I'm initially saving, right, where current income is larger than current consumption, this rho, right, the measure of how impatient I am, is far less than RT. So when that happens, if rho is less than RT, future consumption exceeds current consumption. Thus, I am initially saving, I'm spending less than what I made in period 1, but I am spending much more than I made in period 2. Because, well, you know, period 2, one of the cats invariably gets sick, and then I've got to give that cat another round of treatments. So if you expect that to happen, if you think something bad's going to happen, right, you will save in one period to spend that extra money on your emergency fund in the future. Let's see. All right. So let's redo all of this stuff. Now, I'm not going to go through every single scenario in this, because after this, we're going to go straight into general equilibrium. You're going to learn dynamic programming, and then it's straight on to models of money. Once we do that, we'll talk about the government's budget constraint, we'll talk about how fiscal and monetary policy interact, and then we can cover some pretty influential models in the literature. Okay, so let's talk about income changes. We're going to start with the change in current income. Now, if there's a change in current income, current income YT increases, YT plus 1 doesn't, right? So this would be like you get a bonus at work. What happens here? Well, oh, excuse me. We'll have our initial budget line. And we'll have our initial indifference curve, midpoint of tangent C. Like this. Right, so this is where we'll be starting out. Now, do we want the agent to be saving or borrowing initially? Which one do we want? Let's think about this. Well, look at the notes, and the notes can tell us exactly what we want this to be. So, well, let's say they are initially borrowing. Now, when I labeled these CT and CT plus 1, let's call it C0T and C0T plus 1, because these will be changing, right? Because income will be changing. If income changes, consumption will be changing as well. I'll try the green, see how the green works. Right, so the agent is initially saving, or borrowing, I mean. So you got Y0T, Y0, T plus 1, like that. So this is where we're starting out. There hasn't been a change in income yet. But then, bada bing, bada boom, current income changes. So what happens when current income changes? Well, let's use this green marker again. So if current income changes but future income doesn't, that means future income is going to be the same. So looking at this right here, this Y0T plus 1, Y0T plus 1 equals Y1T plus 1. Y0T is going to be larger than Y1T. So because of that relationship right there with income, what we can gather from that is we drew this dotted line from the CT plus 1 axis at Y0T plus 1. We draw the dotted line over and over and over. Boom, 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 boom. Let's have it like right here, right? Then we're going to draw this dotted line down. All right, well, YT increased. YT plus 1 didn't. So we see a horizontal shift by the distance that YT increased. So what does this do? Well, it shifts the budget line out vertically. However, the slope of that budget line doesn't change. It just shifts out horizontally. So what's going to happen here? Well, we can see, let's draw another indifference curve. What color do we want? We can try orange. Orange might work. Orange might be very bad. We will see. You move to a new indifference curve. Because income rose. Because income went up, right? We can achieve a higher level of utility. And then again, this point is described, is defined by what the Euler equation tells us. So we draw a dotted line down. Get like C1 star T. And draw a dotted line over. And get C1 star T plus 1. And this is what happens when we get an increase in current income. So YT plus 1 remains unchanged. YT doesn't remain unchanged, meaning it changes. So when that happens, so Y0T increases to Y1T. Now we were initially borrowing So what that meant was the initial consumption in in period 1, C0T, was larger than Y0T. And that's still the case. Meaning C1 star T is larger than Y1T. But because we were initially borrowing, we still got to pay it back in the future, and the income in the future didn't change. So future income will increase a little bit. Not by a whole lot, right? Because we still got that initial money we got to pay back. the initial income that we have to pay back. Shouldn't call it money, there's no money here yet. So C naught t plus 1 increases to C1 t plus 1. But both of them are still less than future income because we have to pay back the income that we borrowed yesterday. All right, because the best way to think about this, I've said it before and I'll keep saying it, the best way to think about this is not that you're borrowing from some financial institution. You're actually borrowing against your future self. You're borrowing against your future earnings. So if you borrow against your future earnings, it goes, okay, well, I expect to make X amount of money or X amount of income tomorrow. I know I'm going to make X amount of income tomorrow. Therefore, I can borrow up to a certain point so long as I can continue to pay back that X amount of income. Now, if you get a bonus this period, you're going to consume more, right? You're still planning on borrowing, so you still borrowed. So you still have to plan to pay it back tomorrow. But because your current income increased, you got a bonus, you're going to consume a little bit more today. You're going to be able to consume a little bit more tomorrow. Because some of that income, that you're not going to consume all of that change in income. It's just going to be a little bit. And you're not going to have to just throw all of that extra income that you earned today into paying everything back tomorrow. So there's going to be a little bit of movement around here. And that's what you'll see here. So CT increases. Both CTs are larger than the income at time t. CT plus 1 increases, but both CT plus 1s are still less than future income because there was no change in future income. So you can't expect CT plus 1 to be larger than YT plus 1. That just wouldn't really be very wise. Not only is it not wise, it's also kind of not allowed within the model thanks to the lifetime budget constraint. So let's look at I will allow you to work on your own when it comes to changes in future income. So I would ask if everybody's got this, but you know, it's like YouTube, you can fix the shit. You can just push pause and that'll be that. So on your own, we'll draw out, actually I think I'll just make that the problem set. Well, one problem on that one, yeah. Because we do have to kind of fly through some of this stuff. Unfortunately, we got a little behind because of, well, exogenous shocks. And that is that. So let's think about this. Let's talk about some implications. Changes in income. So as you'll see, as we saw in the first example that I put up, whenever income increases or is expected to increase in the future, so whatever income, YT or YT plus 1, CT plus 1 increases. Not CT plus 1, sorry, CT. but CT plus 1 also increases. So see, consumption increases in all periods. Right? So it's not like consumption is going to stay the same or it's going to fall if YT plus 1 increases rather than YT increasing. I'll give you a hint. What you saw with the increase in current income isn't really all that different from the increase in future income. It's just the change that you're going to see are kind of going to be flipped around a little bit. So the household expects an increase in future income. They save less, which means they borrow more. And increase current consumption. Now this happens because of diminishing marginal utility in both periods, diminishing marginal utility of consumption, to be more precise. So they'll want to increase consumption a little bit in both periods, whether they expect an increase in future income or if they expect or just get an increase in current income. Consumption will increase. And as you saw with the increase in current income, consumption increased in both periods. They were initially borrowing. The consumption increased to still be larger than what the new current income is. And consumption increased in the future, CT plus 1, but was still less than future income. Which leads to a pretty interesting thing. Neat concept that plays a huge role in how these households interact with governments and central banks. You got consumption smoothing. Under consumption smoothing, regardless of changes in income, agents prefer to have a stable path of consumption over time. So whether current income changes, future income changes, or both incomes change, households will smooth out their consumption. And if you remember principles of macroeconomics, when they talked about the different components of GDP, right? Y equals C plus I plus G. Think back to what the most volatile component was. I'm going to give you a hint. It wasn't C or G. It was I, investment. Investment is the most volatile component of GDP. Yet if we look at the smoothest component of GDP, it's consumption. So as an economist who got his PhD from a school that said basically they reject theory without evidence or data, or evidence, data, without theory, This is a case where we get both evidence and theory. The theory suggests what we should see in the evidence, and the evidence confirms what we see in the theory. Consumption is the most stable component of GDP because households prefer to have a stable path of consumption over time. And it makes sense even in a more just hardcore applied sense, right? If you find out that you're going to be getting laid off from your job next month, probably not going to go out and spend like everything you got right now because there's an expected decrease in future income. But that doesn't mean you're just going to move out of the house that you're in, right? You're not just going to go, you know what, screw it. I'm going to drop my lease, or I'm going to just stop paying my mortgage and just ditch the house, let them foreclose. No. You may not spend so much on like nice frivolous shit that you like to get normally. However, on the other hand, what you'll be doing is you'll sort of be maintaining your same quality of life, so to speak. So that's sort of an evidence for, or that's a bit of evidence for consumption smoothing. You will smooth out your consumption over time such that it doesn't really change very much, even though your income might be a little bit more variable. Now, a lot of people looked into this. A lot of very important people looked into this. Super important people. Always important people. Always aliens in the 4th, 5th, and 6th dimensions. Working with rogue breakaway government agencies. And I'll figure this stuff out. Sorry, really bad Alex Jones impression. Namely, this one particular absolute genius, in my very humble opinion, as I'm not that established of an economist yet, guy named Milton Friedman. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't. He was a brilliant macroeconomist. He focused mostly on monetary policy. If you want a really great book to check out, if you just happen to love this course, by the end of it, you're like, wow, I learned so much. I want to learn so much more. Read A Monetary History of the United States by Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz. It was published in like the 60s, I think. Absolutely phenomenal book. If you want to learn a good bit about the Great Depression, one of the tenets that sort of helped cause the Great Depression, definitely check it out, because Milton Friedman is not exactly kind to the Federal Reserve in their actions during the recession that eventually led up to the Great Depression. And he came up with something called the permanent income hypothesis. And this, I believe, I could be wrong. I am sure I will be fact-checked. By YouTube or Snopes or whoever. This permanent income hypothesis is a hypothesis that was hypothesized by Milton Friedman I don't know if you can hear all that banging around outside. The construction has stopped for lunch. That tells you exactly when I'm filming this. Construction stopped for lunch, so all that banging around you hear is my cat screwing around in the spare bathroom. So presumably at least one of the other 3 cats have not yet contracted FIP. So this thing suggests that regardless of changes in income, right? So whether there's a temporary change in income one way or the other, current income increases, goes back to where it was. Or say we're looking at a 3 or 4 period model, income in period 2 increases, goes back to where it was in period 3. Or it increases for the 2 middle periods, but not for the last period, something of that nature. Right? Regardless of those types of changes in income, only permanent changes will affect the consumption savings behavior of optimizing agents. Furthermore, it says lifetime income matters. That agents smooth their consumption over time. Now, you're probably going, Jeremy, dude, what the hell? We saw there were changes in consumption and savings if there were, say, just a change in current income. There was, right? This is where it gets interesting, though. There will be changes in consumption and savings, but if we look at what we saw earlier, income in the first period rose, agent was still borrowing. Income in the second period stayed the same, agent was still spending less, right? So current income increases, you're still going to be borrowing, which means your consumption will increase in that period, your consumption increases in the next period. Current consumption, though, is still larger than current income. Future consumption is still less than future income, indicating one, consumption smoothing. Maybe it'd be a good idea to underline this so you know exactly what the hell I'm talking about with that. So agents are smoothing their consumption over time. They're still consuming more in one period than they were the other. Right, so if they're initially borrowing, they get a rise in income, they're still going to borrow. But the less permanent the change in income, the less they will alter their behavior. So if we had, say, a 4-period model, and income rose in the first 2 periods, but it didn't rise in the 3rd and 4th period, we would see a much larger change in the consumption savings patterns than we saw if there was a 1-period change. There's a 3-period change. We would see even more of a response. 4-period and a 4-period model, massive response. So the more permanent the changes in income, the more you will see changes in the consumption savings behavior, which also makes sense, again, in a more applied, just what happens in our everyday life when we think about this stuff. If you get let's say you win the lottery in 1 period, okay, you're probably going to go out and blow it on a bunch of stuff. It's usually what happens. Maybe you'll save some of it. Chances are you'll spend a lot of it. Maybe you'll pay off your student loan debt, like what I would do, or you would buy a bunch of really cool guitar stuff. Something else I would do. And if you happen to win the lottery, since I'm teaching you about all this stuff, maybe you can buy me an XFX3. It'd be really nice. Currently, I only own a Kemper. An XFX3 would be really cool too. But beyond that, if you get just a one quick time boost in your income, that will change your consumption savings behavior, but not that much. However, if you get this really awesome job that pays you like $500,000 a year, consumption savings behavior is going to change a lot more over the course of your lifetime. Probably going to buy a bigger house, probably going to buy a nicer car, probably going to have a lot of really awesome guitars if you play guitar. If you don't buy the really awesome guitars, then give them to me. I'm a huge fan of Jackson guitars, by the way. Probably buy a bunch of really cool amplifiers. Mesa Boogies are good. Just in case any of you happen to feel particularly generous, Mesa Boogies are very good. PVs are kind of nice. I own 3 PV amps, technically 4. So obviously I'm not averse to PVs. An XFX3 would be nice. That thing models almost any amplifier you want. Angles are good. Angles are very good, actually. I'll take an angle in a heartbeat. A rev generator would be great as well. But anyways, I digress. You get a really awesome job, pays you a lot of money, it's a massive increase in your income. You're going to see a more permanent change in your consumption savings behavior. Consumption will increase more, savings will increase more. So it's something that is not just suggested by economic theory, meaning just math. It's not just suggested by math that has to have some sort of bounded reasoning behind it. It's not just suggested by what we see or what we could expect to happen just with the little examples I gave you and my love for guitar amplifiers. It's also borne out in the data in the aggregate. When we see there are major changes in income at the aggregate level, consumption will change with the changes in income, but it's still stable around those changes in income. So if income is kind of low, it's bouncing around that, still pretty stable. Income is high, again, it's bouncing around that, it's pretty stable. It's just higher. Permanent income hypothesis. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this section. It'll be on you to, for the problem set, draw out what you think will happen if there is a change in future income with current income remaining the same. I guess that'll be the only problem, because why the hell not? And that will wrap up this chapter. The next chapter will deal with dynamic general equilibrium modeling, where we have, rather than exogenous output, where they just take output Y as given, it's actually endogenized. Because we have gone through the other stuff, it should be a relatively quick procedure to go through. You'll still have to take some derivatives. I will teach 2 different ways to do it. One way is already online on YouTube for this model. The other I will be covering in the next lecture. So until then, I guess enjoy and try not to hate yourselves too much, and I will do the same. So, peace.